Hello and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Please sign up at my Patreon to get episodes earlier, bonuses, to have a say on future content, and to interact with me and other Warbirders directly. But mainly you'll have the satisfaction of helping keep this podcast going. You can also toss me a tip via PayPal at WOWB17, or even just drop me a review. Thank you for your support. Now on to the show. Hello, Warbirders. Firstly, I want to welcome Mark French and Dante to the Patreon family. Thank you for your support. I also just recently had a whole bunch of new free members joining also. So welcome to Stormer, AJ, Bernard, Leon, Sean, Chris, Mark S., and I love this name, Jolly Rancher. Welcome aboard, but I'd love to see you join as supporting members and getting those benefits. All right, enough housekeeping blah blah blah, let's dive in. The Shinmeiwa US-2 is an incredible piece of tech. It's a massive 4-engine turboprop with short takeoff and landing capabilities, employing boundary layer control technology for stall suppression performance. It can land in very rough seas, that's waves up to 3 meters, that's like 9 feet. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force uses them primarily for long-range rescue missions where a helicopter wouldn't have the fuel to make it back. It was introduced in March 2007 and still is in service today. Whoa, don't switch the episode. Yes, this is World of Warbirds. And no, I am not being held hostage and being forced to do a more modern aircraft against my will. The reason I bring up the Shinmeiwa is just to highlight how deep the flying boat heritage is in Japan. That it still employs this type of aircraft well after many countries that pioneered and perfected the technology have long since given up on it. I think about one of my favorite older episodes, the short Sunderland, which in my mind was the undisputed king of British flying boats. The Supermarine Walrus wasn't fast or particularly pretty, but I'm imagining that she was the most beautiful thing in the world to the countless downed airmen who were rescued from the English Channel by her. The Germans had a whole bench of flying boats, including the Blohm & Voss BV-138, the Sea Dragon, the Dornier DO-24, and the monster Blohm & Voss BV-222 Viking. The Americans also had a series of flying boat stars, such as the Martin PBM Mariner and Consolidated PBY Catalina. And yet, none of these countries have continued with employing flying boats operationally. Yes, don't remind me, all of these need episodes of their own. So many warbirds, so little time. The one exception that I would have to make to my sweeping assertion that flying boats have disappeared is the CL-415 Super Scooper Water Bomber, which is a Canadian-made amphibious flying boat. With the changing climate and the increasing number of wildfires, the 415 is a hard-working firefighter, with a new model, the 515, already beginning production. I've personally seen them in action in the lake near my house, and they are just perfect for what they do. But it's the Japanese that still employ traditional flying boats, so to me, that shows commitment. Let's dive in. But first, let's state a few definitions. Any aircraft that can operate on the water falls under the broad category of seaplane, even if the plane never lands on salt water. A float plane is essentially a standard aircraft that uses slender, separate pontoons or floats mounted under the fuselage to stay above the water. The main body of the plane never actually touches the surface. In contrast, a flying boat features a fuselage specifically engineered to act as a ship's hull, meaning the belly of the plane sits directly in the water to provide flotation. Because of this structural difference, float planes are typically smaller, whereas the flying boat design is favored for a much larger seaworthy aircraft that needs to handle rougher ocean chops. I mentioned amphibian before, which means an aircraft that can land on both water and land. Most flying boats cannot, although they can be brought on shore by the use of beaching gear that would be attached to either side of the fuselage while it was in the water. That would allow the plane to taxi up a ramp and onto the land. Some are confusing, like the consolidated PBY Catalina, which had amphibs and pure flying boat variants. So where did the Japanese obsession with seaplanes come from? Back in the late 1920s and early 30s, the Imperial Japanese Navy, or IJN, was presented with the scenario of a fight against the U.S. Navy in the vast expanses of the Pacific. Building aircraft carriers was one solution to the problem of covering the vast ocean distances. Another way was to develop a naval air long-range bomber force that could operate from isolated islands on which airfields would be built. But there was a problem. The Washington Naval Treaty that Japan signed back in 1922. You might ask, what does a naval treaty have to do with airfields? Article 19 of the treaty was known as the status quo or the non-fortification clause. Under Article 19, the U.S., Great Britain, and Japan agreed to maintain the status quo on their Pacific island bases. This meant that they were forbidden from expanding or modernizing fortifications, naval repair facilities, and most importantly, airfields in the region. So a solution was, if you couldn't build or update airfields, then just make airplanes that didn't need airports. They could operate anywhere in the Pacific and be served with minimal installations or tenders, which were special ships provided by the Navy to support seaplane operations. Kawanishi's start in the flying boat business began in this environment. In 1929, the Imperial Japanese Navy requested a new long-range reconnaissance flying boat. Kawanishi, looking for inspiration, sent a research team to the UK, and more specifically, Short Brothers, who were experts in the flying boat business. After doing some shopping in the showroom and kicking a few tires, hulls, Kawanishi settled on the Short Rangoon. This was a 3-engine, biplane flying boat, with the 3 Bristol Jupiter engines mounted between the wings, which were in turn located above the flying boat hull. It was from the time when aircraft were made of a variety of metal and non-metal materials, with the main structure being composed of duraluminum formers, spars, ribs, and stringers, and skinned in duraluminum, and the flying surfaces were partly skinned and partly fabric covered. It had an enclosed cockpit for the pilots, rest bunks, fuel tanks in the upper wing, 3 Lewis guns, 1 mounted forward of the cockpit and 2 in the fuselage behind the wings, underwing bomb racks, and a large freshwater tank, which would be useful as the name suggests. The Rangoon was imagined for tropical use. So Kawanishi bought one and liked it so much that they bought a license to build their own, and used this process to learn about building flying boats. First thing they did was ditch the Bristol Jupiter engines in favor of the more muscular Rolls-Royce Buzzards. They also switched to all-metal for their version, which they called the H6K. There will be pics of everything on the Patreon page, so go check those out. Its 3 Buzzard engines were mounted above the 2 wings in streamlined nacelles, topped with prominent radiators. Inside the hull, the H6K was designed for endurance. While the 2 pilots originally sat in separate side-by-side cockpits, the rest of the 8-man crew operated from a surprisingly well-appointed interior. Deep within the fuselage, the flight engineer and radio operator shared space with a galley, a wardroom, and sleeping quarters. Necessities for the long-range maritime patrols the H6K was built to handle. Kawanishi ended up building 5 versions, tinkering with each one until they were ready to build their own. And what a leap they were about to make. In 1934, the IJN put out a request for a long-range flying boat, and Kawanishi was ready. They designed a flying destroyer, meant to stay aloft for 24 hours at a time. This required a layout that prioritized range, defense, and crew sustainability. They scrapped the biplane design of the H6K and hung their hull under a parasol wing by a network of struts. Just as a reminder, a parasol wing is a monoplane design where the wing is mounted entirely above the fuselage rather than being attached directly to it. Parasol means umbrella in French, which is a pretty good descriptor of how the wing seems to float above the fuselage, like an umbrella is above a person. The wing was hoisted high up above the hull to keep the engines clear of corrosive salt spray. They added another Mitsubishi Kinsei engine to the 3 in the H6K, making the new one a large 4-engine monoplane with twin tails for greater stability. It was big. I'll use the American PBY Catalina for a comparison. For although I haven't done an episode on her yet, I know. I think most warbirders are familiar with the general size and look. So the new plane had a similar look to the PBY, but with an extra 2 engines, and it was about 1.5 times bigger. With a wingspan of 40 meters, that's 131 feet, a length of 25 meters, that's 84 feet, and a height of 6 meters, 20 feet. Where the look differed is that the Catalina was more sleek and slippery. Her wing floats retracted and her parasol wing was supported by a single pylon. The Kawanishi ship was more draggy, with lots of struts and wing floats that stayed fixed down. But then again, she had 2 more engines. Kawanishi's new plane was called the H6K, and the Allies would dub her Mavis. Mavis was intended for very long-range patrols, sometimes lasting a full day and night. So the hull was built surprisingly spacious. There were dedicated bunks and a galley, allowing the 9 crewmen to eat and sleep in shifts while maintaining their patrol line. But she wasn't just intended for reconnaissance. Mavis could strike with 2 Type 91 torpedoes. Those were 800 kilograms or 1,764 pounds each, or up to 1,000 kilograms, 2,200 pounds of bombs. Common configurations included 2 800-kilogram bombs for heavy land targets, or 4 250-kilogram bombs, or 12 60-kilogram bombs, which were often used for anti-submarine patterns. Where Mavis actually carried these weapons is interesting. Of course, all flying boats are unable to have internal bomb bays, because these would have compromised the watertight integrity of the hull. Hanging the stuff under the wings is an option for some, but Mavis had many struts supporting her parasol wing, so Kawanishi's designers decided to hang her ordnance there. I know it's hard to visualize. I had to look it up myself, so be sure to check out the pics on Patreon when you can. Mavis could also defend herself with 5 7.7mm Type 92 machine guns. Unlike many contemporary flying boats that left the rear vulnerable, the Mavis featured a large rounded tail turret. She also had teardrop-shaped waist blisters, allowing gunners to scan for submarines or intercepting fighters, and there was a forward-facing bow gun. Kawanishi built 3 prototypes, improving things with each new model. The first flew on the 14th of July 1936, and Mavis was considered a great success. Production kicked off, and eventually 217 examples were built. Some special ones were 16 unarmed transports, 2 VIP transports, and 16 were civilian air transports operated by Dai Nippon Airways, which was the Imperial Japanese national airline. with onboard toilet, galley, and room for 18 passengers. Mavis entered service in 1938 as the undisputed king of Pacific distance, cutting its teeth during the conflict in China before becoming the long-range eyes of the IJN. At the start of the war, 4 kukutai, or naval air groups, operated 66 H6K-4s. And as I said before, 16 were used by the Imperial Japanese Airline for mail and passenger service all over the Pacific. In the opening act of World War II, the Mavis was everywhere, utilizing her legendary 24-hour endurance to shadow Allied fleets and conduct daring long-range bombing raids from Wake Island to the Dutch East Indies. On the 12th of December 1941, during the Battle of Wake Island, an H6K bombed Wake Island, but it was shot down by an F-4F Wildcat. It operated from remote palm-fringed lagoons, acting as a flying destroyer that could scout thousands of miles of empty ocean where no land-based plane could reach. During these early days, the Mavis was a genuine threat. She was used extensively by the Japanese forces in the Southwest Pacific region during the war, both in reconnaissance, bomber, and transport roles. Mavis units operated from New Guinea and the Netherlands East Indies, and on the 4th of January 1942, at approximately 7 p.m., 11 Mavises bombed the airfield at Vanuatu at Rabaul, and 2 days later, a further 9 bombed the same target. Attempts were made to intercept them with Australian-built CAC Wirraways, but without success. What's a Wirraway? You clearly haven't listened to my episode on this Australian fighter. I'll put a link in the show notes. A few days later, on the 9th of January 1942, a No. 6 Squadron, Lockheed Hudson, on a reconnaissance mission, spotted 8 Mavis flying boats in the harbor at Truk in the Caroline Islands. On the 11th of June, a No. 32 Squadron Lockheed Hudson based at Horn Island, flown by Flight Officer L. Halliday, shot down a Mavis just south of New Britain. Now, if you thought that Mavis was just a passive reconnaissance type bird, you'd be wrong. The type was actually used to hit Australia. A bombing mission was made on the night of 25 to 26 June, and at 11:35 p.m., against Townsville, Queensland, by 3 Mavises. The city sustained little damage as all 6 bombs all fell in the harbor. Searchlights located the aircraft, but there was no fighter interception. On the night of the 26th of June, a Mavis dropped 8 bombs in the foothills of the Many Peaks Range, North Queensland, drawing fire from anti-aircraft guns. 6 Bell P-39 Airacobras took off and attempted an interception, but without luck. On the 29th of June, at 2:27 a.m., a Mavis dropped 7 bombs, 6 into the harbor, but the 7th hit the town, causing some broken windows. Again, 4 P-39s clawed up for an interception, and this time one got close enough to fire its guns. But the lucky flying boat escaped. On the 31st of June, Mossman, on the tablelands west of Cairns, Queensland, was attacked by a Mavis, causing the first civilian air raid casualty on Australia's east coast in World War II. On the 15th of February 1942, a Mavis was shadowing a convoy, which included the United States Navy cruiser USS Houston. Lieutenant Robert Buell of the United States Army Air Force, flying his P-40 Kitty Hawk, attacked and shot down the Mavis. But in the engagement, Buell was also shot down and killed, and neither his body or his Kitty Hawk were ever found. Are you enjoying the show? Please help support it at World of Warbirds Patreon. It's only $5 a month. If you are presently listening to this through Patreon, well then thank you for your support. You can give me a review or share me with a friend. It all helps, and I appreciate it more than you know. On November 21st, 1942, the blue expanse south of Guadalcanal became the stage for one of the most surreal, heavyweight dogfights of the Pacific War. It was a 20-minute, slow-motion slugfest between two four-engine giants that were never meant to fight. Misfit, an American B-17E Flying Fortress, and a Kawanishi H6K Mavis, piloted by Lieutenant Hitoshi Hitsuji. I've included a painting of the engagement on the Patreon page, so check it out. Luckily, and against all odds, Lieutenant Hitsuji survived the war to pen his memoir, which is called Saigo no Hikotai, or The Last Flying Boat, which provides a rare, gritty look at the war from the cockpit of a Japanese maritime patroller, and includes the details on the Mavis versus B-17 duel. And what better way to tell the story than in his own words? "Enemy plane! Close! Starboard and to the rear!" the tail gunner reported. "All men on air-to-air battle station," I yelled as I put the plane in a full-speed dive to sea level. It was 0700, November 21st, 1942. 150 nautical miles south of Guadalcanal. We were in the midst of a very bloody battle, losing flying boats almost every day to unidentified enemy activities. Our boats would just have enough time to radio a consecutive "hi" signal. Consecutive signaling of the Japanese Morse code signal for the character "hi," the initial for Haikoki, or airplane, before the shootout, followed by silence. Very few survived air combat. If a boat is able to make detailed reports about the enemy, that boat was sure to make it back. Our commanding officer was in distress about the mounting losses, and so just a few days ago I had assured him that this will not go on for long. So far, 16 of our boats were lost. I was not about to be number 17. It wasn't a patrol plane's duty to engage in air battles, but now I had no choice. I figured that the fight must be decided quickly. The B-17 positioned itself above and to the starboard rear of our plane and followed us with ease. It must be radioing its base about our position. One of them was bad enough. If there were two, or even fighter planes, we did not have a chance. I made a tight turn to the port and headed towards the enemy. The only chance we had was the relatively small turning radius of our slow plane compared to that of the fast B-17. The enemy was obviously surprised at our sudden turn. As we passed each other, our tail gunner fire hit the B-17, and its port inside engine started smoking. The enemy fled, trailing a long streamer of black smoke. The enemy was surprisingly impersistent. We continued our search mission, but I had the feeling that it wasn't over yet. "Eat your breakfast now, before they come back," I ordered, and went to the commander's seat to open my lunchbox. Pretty soon, the co-pilot silently pointed his finger forward and to port. I took a hard look, and there he was. Another big-tailed B-17 headed straight towards us. The one we damaged must have called for help. We were all ready to fight, and I stood up from my seat. I sealed the tank chamber and pulled the fire extinguisher lever. This fills the tank chamber with CO2. All gunners manned their stations. I could see the front gunner grinning in his turret. "Okay, we're ready," somebody said. At altitude 30 meters and speed 150 knots, we headed towards the direction of our base. The enemy didn't start his attack immediately. It flew alongside us and past us. I figured that he was avoiding our tail cannon. It would probably be making a frontal attack. The shootout was about to begin. "Here it comes!" someone shouted, and at the same time the enemy's front guns and all 4 of our starboard machine guns started firing. As we passed each other, I could see the enemy's tail gun fire, but tracers were way behind us. No hits on either side. We didn't change our course as we headed towards a squall. The faster enemy caught up quickly and crisscrossed our path, attacking us as it passed us. We were at very low altitude, and the sea beneath us whitened with machine gun fire. As the shooting went on, this started moving closer and closer. I could not hear anything other than the roar of the machine guns and the engine noise. I couldn't keep my eyes off the enemy for a moment. The enemy made a fourth pass, and as it crossed our path, a .50 caliber shell jumped into the cockpit. I heard someone yell, "Damn!" and smelled smoke at the same time. I turned around and 2 men were down on the floor. Our main radio man, Watanabe's left arm was hanging limp from his shoulder, and blood was shooting up to the ceiling. Flight engineer leading mechanic Nakano was down on the floor, holding his left arm and shouting, "Gasoline! Gasoline!" He was yelling to the radio man because the spark from the telegram key could set the vaporized gasoline on fire. But the injured radio man continued to send the message that we were combating an enemy bomber. The enemy started making yet another pass. I took off my scarf and threw it to Lieutenant Ide, who was shooting away, and yelled, "Stop his bleeding!" I could see from the tank chamber window that gas was gushing out of a hit tank. It was a miracle that it wasn't on fire. The floor was soon covered with gas. I injected additional CO2 gas, and I could see the white gas filling the tank chamber. The injured mechanic was still yelling, "Gasoline!" and I could only yell back, "It's okay. You worry about yourself." We were able to stop the radio man's bleeding, but the enemy was still attacking. Amid the exchange of machine gun roar, I could hear bullets tearing into our plane. The plane shook under the impact. All 4 engines were driving at full power. On their 6th pass, the moment I saw their tailgun fire, there was an enormous banging noise. Up front, gunner P.O. Takahashi pointed to the floor beneath the pilot's seat, and I noted a big hole about 30 centimeters on the keel of our bow. I could see waves from the hole. By this time, I was sure that this enemy has shot down more than one flying boat. It wasn't fighters. It was this guy. Another patrol plane. I'm going to get him. He is not going to have any more kill marks. As I came to this realization, there was a new determination in my mind. If we can't down him with our guns, we will ram him. I drew and loaded my pistol. If worse comes to worse, we'll ram him, okay? I patted the main pilot, Ensign Kobayashi's shoulder with my pistol. He nodded lightly. Okay, we're ready then. My mind was set. I was going to shoot myself at the moment of the ramming, so I would die before the crew. I noted that the side panel of the commander's seat was burning hot. I was shocked to find the bullet that hit the crewman perched in the panel. Had I not been standing, this bullet would have hit my back. And this bullet is still in my possession. I noticed that the enemy's fire was getting considerably weaker. Either some of their gunners were knocked out, or they were out of ammo. I was getting the feeling that we may be able to make it when the co-pilot suddenly put the plane in a dive. The sea was right in front of us. "Not yet," I yelled, thinking that he was about to ram the B-17, but soon realized that our co-pilot, Pilot Officer Kira, had avoided a collision with the enemy who came in from the side. The enemy passed about 30 meters behind us. The tail gunner poured an entire drum of 20mm cannon shells into the B-17. The shells all hit the enemy's fuselage. The enemy passed us from the right and then banked left and started closing into our plane. I could see the enemy pilot's face. I couldn't help but fire my pistol at the enemy. Maybe the enemy was trying to ram us too. I noticed all his guns were pointing random directions. He must have been out of ammo. He flew alongside us, banking and yawing for a while, but eventually disappeared into the rain towards Guadalcanal, trailing gasoline. "We won," we said to each other, but we could no longer fight. We made it back to Shortland, but taxiing was somewhat of a small adventure. After splashdown, as soon as the bow came down, water started gushing in from the hole in the bow. Since we did not have material to close the big hole in the bow, we stuffed life jackets into the hole. This obviously wasn't holding up, and 6 men piled on the life jacket stuffed hole to stop the water. By the time we were beached, the men had their heads barely above the water. Everyone was covered with water and oil and blood. But we had survived the dogfight with the B-17. Are you curious about what happened to Misfit, the B-17? Well, I was too. And although this episode is supposed to be about the Mavis, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you about it. Remember in the movies about Pearl Harbor when the B-17s show up in the middle of the battle? Yes, this B-17 was one of those. While circling to land on that fateful day, a Japanese Zero made a firing pass but failed to cause any damage. And the B-17 turned for Wheeler Field, but was ordered to return, but aborted his landing when a burning plane pulled in ahead of him. Finally, on his 3rd attempt, landed safely at Hickam Field, and the crew quickly exited and ran for cover. Did you check out the picture of the engagement on the Patreon page? If so, one of the first things you would notice is the weird paint pattern on the B-17. I've never before seen a B-17 painted up like that. Sometime after December 7th, she was painted in the Hawaiian Air Depot in a 3-color camo scheme consisting of dark green, olive drab, and tan upper surfaces, with the standard gray lower surfaces. On January 16, 1942, this B-17 took off on a reconnaissance mission to support USS Enterprise, CV-6, which was protecting a convoy reinforcing Samoa. The B-17 developed problems with the No. 3 engine, grounding it at Fiji until the end of the month, where she was cannibalized for parts to repair other bombers. Eventually she was patched up though and returned to service. Notice that I haven't referred to her by her name yet. On April 30th, 1942, this still unnamed B-17 took off, piloted by Captain Richard Stepp on a patrol mission. On return, it landed short at Bellows Field, tearing off the tail section. It was here that she was dubbed Misfit for all the misadventures that she had already experienced. She was patched up, again, becoming a bit of a Frankenplane. On October 23, 1942, Misfit took off from Bomber 1 airfield on Espiritu Santo on a anti-submarine patrol mission over the Solomon Sea. During the flight, this bomber encountered an H6K for Mavis and engaged in air-to-air combat with the enemy flying boat. After a battle that lasted 45 minutes, 2 of Misfit's crew were wounded, but the Mavis was shot down and crashed into the sea in flames. Just in case you didn't catch the dates, this dogfight was a month before the one with Lieutenant Hitoshi Hitsuji. Yes, the account I read you before was the second dogfight that Misfit had participated in. In that second dogfight, the gunners fired 450 rounds of 50 cal, and before Lieutenant Hitsushi's Mavis got away, damaged the No. 2 engine, and Misfit made an emergency landing at Henderson Field. But Misfit kept soldiering on, taking fire, losing engines, but bringing the fight to the enemy. By March 27, 1943, Misfit had logged 1,400 combat hours of flying. In August 1943, she must have been so tired and war-weary, and so she was finally transferred out and flew non-combat flights for the next 13 months. On September 1, 1944, she departed the South Pacific and flew back across the Pacific to the United States, where she was used for crew training in Florida and Yuma, Arizona, at the USAAF's Flexible Gunnery School. I really wish I could say that Misfit is in a museum somewhere. She really kind of deserves it. and reading the next line literally brings a tear to my eye. On June 25th, 1945, she was scrapped at Albuquerque, New Mexico. Anyway, please forgive me for that detour or trip down the rabbit hole. I just couldn't leave that story behind, and as I've already done the B-17, it had to be told here. So, let's wrap it up with Mavis. By 1942, Mavis was living on borrowed time. While its 24-hour endurance had made it the perfect scout for the early Pacific expansion, the air war had shifted. It was now a high-stakes arena where a slow, unarmored flying boat was essentially a flying torch waiting for an Allied fighter to strike the match. The IJN had long ago realized that they would be needing something faster, tougher, and significantly more powerful to maintain their grip on the ocean. Luckily, just as Mavis was entering service, her replacement, the Kawanishi H6K Emily, was already being planned. If Mavis was a flying destroyer, Emily was a flying battleship. It took the parasol wing concept of its predecessor and refined it into a sleek shoulder wing powerhouse. To solve the glass jaw problem that nearly killed Lieutenant Hitsuji and his crew, the Emily was designed from the keel up with massive self-sealing fuel tanks and heavy armor plating. As the aging Mavis was gradually pulled back to the safety of transport and courier lines, the Emily stepped forward to become the most advanced flying boat of World War II, and she will be the subject of my next episode. Sadly, there are no complete survivors of Mavis, but there are wrecks of 3 that lie in the Fiji Islands in a channel off of Korovu, north of Maguse, and are regularly inspected by divers, these aircraft remaining where they were sunk. Another was sunk in shallow waters near Rabaul on the New Britain's north coast. Please come back next time when we get to know Emily. Thanks to all my Patreon supporters. You guys keep me getting up at 5 a.m. to make this show. Until next time.